What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Osprey Nest. The Osprey is back for some more awesome retro game reviews. They say big things come in small packages, and today we're going to be looking at just that with the Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance was released by Nintendo in 2001, and it became an immediate success in the world of handheld gaming, selling 500,000 units in its first week in the US alone. The Game Boy Advance sold for $99 when it was first introduced in 2001, which probably isn't a whole lot of money for an electronic device by today's standards, but back then it was kind of on the expensive side. But a lot of people still bought them. It's got a D-pad, start and select button, little power indicator. It turns green when it's got full battery, turns red when the batteries are starting to run out. You got your speaker, A and B buttons, you got your shoulder buttons, left and right, an external link cable, cartridge slot, you got your on and off switch, headphone jack, volume selector, and on the back we've got our battery compartment, which takes 2 AA batteries. And these are just a few of the many games made for the Game Boy Advance. They've also released a couple in a more light gray cartridge known as the classic NES series, with games like the original Castlevania for Nintendo and the NES port of Xevious by Namco. Let's fire this thing up and go. There you have it. That's Game Boy Advance. Game Boy Advance has some pretty great games, such as racing games, first-person shooters like Doom. It's got skateboarding games like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. Konami has some pretty good games for the Game Boy Advance too, like Frogger's Adventures, Temple of the Frog, extremely difficult game, but it's also pretty fun to play and has a pretty deep storyline. Other Game Boy Advance classics from Konami include entries in the legendary Castlevania series like Circle of the Moon and Harmony of Dissonance. Another great but also really long and difficult game. We also have the classic NES series, which include NES ports of games like the NES version of Namco's Xevious, you need to have good reflexes and good accuracy for this game. And besides 2 AA batteries, the Game Boy Advance could also work with an AC adapter like this one here. You just take the battery compartment out and attach this. There we go. And then you just plug this thing here in the back of there, and then plug this into the wall. It's not really chargeable. It's just made so that you can play it plugged into the wall instead of wasting your batteries. So the Game Boy Advance was a pretty fun handheld system that had almost any type of game for almost any personality that wanted to take a fun game with them to play on the go. But because the Game Boy Advance was so great, Nintendo decided to make it even better in 2003 with the Game Boy Advance SP, which was square-shaped. It could flip up kind of like a mini Nintendo DS or one of those old flip phones from the 2000s. And that version had a backlit screen and an AC adapter and a rechargeable battery. Now, the Game Boy Advance battery life isn't that bad compared to the original Game Boy, which took 4 batteries, and if you think that's insane, early color handheld game systems like the Atari Lynx and the Sega Game Gear took 6 AA batteries, and those things drain batteries in less than 4 hours. The Game Boy Advance isn't exactly a back pocket friendly device. It can fit there, but that's the last place you want to put it if you want to sit down, which is a mistake I am way too smart to make. You might be able to carry it with you if you have good cargo pockets, but it can look kind of awkward and obvious sitting in there. An officially licensed Game Boy Advance case made by Nintendo can be a little tough to come by these days. But there are alternatives you can use, like the front pocket of your trusty Fjallraven backpack. Let's get in there. Or if you want something that's a little smaller and more on the minimalistic side, you can get this little tactical Molly sling pack. Kilroy was here, patch not included. You can pack your Game Boy Advance in here with some extra games and your Sailor Moon wallet. And that's what I call retro gaming on the go. Oh, and don't forget some AA batteries. That would help. That's more like it. So would I recommend picking up a Game Boy Advance? Yes, definitely. The Game Boy Advance and the Game Boy Advance SP can go from really cheap to really expensive on eBay, depending on the model you get and whether or not it's a limited edition. And yeah, the Game Boy Advance and the Game Boy Advance SP was available in all different types of colors. It even had some special limited edition Target versions with the Target logo up here on the screen. That's just some more nostalgia for me, because I remember when I was really young and I first played the Game Boy Advance when they had the floor model on display at Target back in the day. So I hope you enjoyed this video, so I'll see you next time.